Hello everybody, this is ManOS and welcome to another Eternal Top Decks video series here on EternalTitans.com. Today I want to talk to you guys about one of the other tier 1 decks in the format, Fire, Justice, Shadow, Cookbook Control, especially after crankypanda took down the second test tournament with it. This has become one of the core pillars of the format, and I think is one of the better decks to keep up with the Haunting Scream aggro deck in this metagame, and an important deck to talk about. So time to do that now. Let's take a look at the deck list. Alright, so this is the current list. It's has a couple of changes from Cranky's original list. Most of them he liked and approved of himself as well, because he's now on our team. So but yeah, there are a couple things that I'm not 100% sure on and that he doesn't like as much, so I'll mention them when we get to them. So for units, we have 14 units, 4 Merchant, 4 Vara, 3 Statuary Maiden and 3 Rizahn. The Maiden and the Rizahn have the 4th copy in the market, that's why there's only 3. And then for Vara and for Merchant, because they're just amazing cards and you want to play as many of them as you can. So Merchant just gives you access to more cookbooks, gives you access to Boar, which can be very powerful, especially in the cookbook fights and against a bunch of other things like obelisks and so on, Mask of Torment. Just a very versatile, powerful card. And then the 5th market card is an Icaria to have sort of like a powerful late game fetch target to go over the top when you just need like a real win condition, since Maiden and Rizahn are more like value and utility cards rather than reliable win conditions, although both of them can sometimes just win games on their own in certain matchups. And yeah, Vara is just very important. It's another source of lifesteal, which is important when you're cooking the books, and also make sure that you can fight all the pesky Aegis, especially out of the combo aggro decks, which otherwise would be very problematic for a deck like this, I think. So Vara is very important there. And yeah, Rizahn is just amazing. 2 for 1, another lifesteal unit, flyer, just an amazing card, and one of the things that makes the deck as powerful as it is. Then we have 6 attachments, 3 cookbooks with the 4th in the market, and 3 Sword of the Sky King. Cranky originally had 2 Sword of the Sky King and 2 Icaria main. The thing is, I'm not super happy with Icaria these days in the main deck. Like 8 is just a lot. The card can be quite low impact, especially in, say, the Mirror, where they have Varas and Sword of the Sky Kings and stuff to just deal with her pretty easily, and then she's not that impressive. And I feel like Sword of the Sky King is a lot better in most of these matchups, but there are some matchups where Icaria is better. Say against the Scream aggro deck, for example, Icaria is definitely more impressive than Sword of the Sky King, but I think Icaria is much more situational and narrow than Sword, which is why I prefer trying just 3 Sword in the main and then having the 1 Icaria in the market to get her in the situational scenarios that she's good in, rather than have her like randomly all the time when having her in my main deck. Could be wrong about that. I think the other thing is that since you run Vara yourself, that also makes Icaria weaker, because when you have a Vara out, you just play an 8-drop that doesn't even have Aegis and is comparatively easy to deal with for the opponent. Sure, you can play around it sometimes. You can just not play Icaria while you have the Vara, because at least if she's like a 5-6, the opponent cannot ignore her and eventually will at least have to trade with her, and then you can drop Icaria. So it's not as big of a deal as it might seem, but it's still something that can come up and can be annoying. Also, not having 4 8-drops is also something to keep in mind that is beneficial. And the other thing is that I really kind of wanted that 4 slot for something else, so that freed up that precious slot that I wanted. Then we have a removal suit of 4 Torch, 1 Annihilate, 2 Vanquish, 4 Slay and 4 Harsh Rule. Oh, and 4 Devastating Setback. So basically I cut the sabotages for more setbacks. While sabotage is nice because it's very cheap and efficient, it's also quite situational and can be pretty low impact in the deck and isn't super important in the way this specific deck plays out. The more controlling the deck is, the less important discard effects become. It's more of a mid-range thing. And Setback is just amazing. Scream is the big bad that you really need to beat. Setback is great at helping you against their good draws where they curve out and you fall behind early. And lets you catch back up, since Vanquish is very situational against their draws. They can easily have draws where Vanquish does nothing. Annihilate only hits their Dusk Raider, so that's also not great. And Slay is very inefficient and pretty slow, so you're very much dependent on Torch, and Setback gives you more ways to make sure you don't lose before the game really kicked in. And yeah, also of course Skycrack aggro, one of the problematic matchups. Setback is amazing there, and having getting to run like 4 discard against slow decks and 4 mini sweepers against tokens and aggressive decks in one slot is amazing for a deck like this. Sure, it's clunkier than say the sabotages, and the double shadow on 3 can be a bit taxing, but it's totally worth it, and even on 4 the card is still good, and the deck wants to focus on double shadow early on anyway because of Vara and of Setback, even if you run less setbacks, so it's not that big of an opportunity cost. And yeah, I split the 3 Vanquish into 2 Vanquish and 1 Annihilate because there's a lot more Combre aggro again, and Teacher in general, some Praxis tokens. So having a 5th out to a Teacher, especially on the draw, is pretty important because Teacher is really painful for this deck, so I wanted at least 1 additional answer here. If I would run an additional removal, it would probably be a 2nd Annihilate, but I don't really have room for that at the moment. And yeah, Vanquish is just really good at dealing with most things that you need to deal with, especially in the mid and late game. Slay is just not great at anything other than just being able to always do something, even though not super efficient and not super flexible because it is not fast, it costs 3, but it gets the job done. And Harsh Rule is a bit hit or miss. Like, it is actually pretty bad in most games against Scream and other like Skycrack style aggro decks, but it can be really good in random games, in random scenarios, and against stuff like Combre aggro, Praxis tokens, that sort of stuff. So it's still a necessary evil, but a card that isn't as great right now as it could be or used to be. Partially also why I cut the 1 end of the story, since yeah, I just don't think Harsh Rule is that great, so you really don't want more than the actual Harsh Rules, and they are not great. You can still like merchant them away early, and later they can just become like an expensive Slay, which is still okay. And then we have 2 Privilege of rank, 4 Seek power and 26 power as power sources. Cranky had 25 and 4 Seek and 2 Privilege, but I feel like this is a bit iffy both for the color symbols to get enough shadow for the setbacks and stuff, and the cookbooks, and also a bit light on power since you really need to hit your power drops. And the thing is, you can't, I wanted like 20 shadow for the setbacks. That's still not ideal, but it's like the minimum that I'm willing to go to make Setback reasonably reliable on 3, like consistency percentage wise. Then the thing is, if you run to Privilege, I think you want at least the 5 Justice Sigils, especially with Seek powers, so they hit most of the time, because otherwise if you need the power to like get to 8 for example, and then you have a Privilege that draws you like 1 or 0 power, it's really bad. And then you need like enough duels to get all the shadow and fire in the deck. And the Justice sources already are down to 16 plus the privileges, so you also can't really cut a Justice Sigil because of this. So with this configuration I get to like 16 Justice, 18 Fire and 20 Shadow, plus 2 Privilege, bringing the Justice virtually up to 18 justice, as long as we are talking double justice for Harsh Rule and Rizahn, and to a lesser extent sort of the Sky King. Since for Rizahn and Sky King 17 would probably be okay, like hard 17, no privilege. But for Harsh Rule 17 is iffy, so with the Harsh Rule I wanted the 16 plus 2 privilege to make the Harsh Rule reliable on 5 usually. And yeah, then the power base, the rest of the power base just kind of goes from there. There's only 11 crests. I wouldn't mind trying 12. The problem is you can't play the 4th Crest of Glory, because you need enough Stonescar duels due to the high count of Justice Sigils to get to your setbacks and your cookbooks, which is why there is one Stonescar banner over a 4th Crest of Glory. Also, Stonescar banner is actually quite decent. The deck has quite a lot of units, so if you stick your first unit, then a banner in the mid game is much better than a seed, since a seed off the top as your only power will be a depleted power guaranteed, and the Stonescar banner will only be a depleted power off the top when you don't have a unit. The deck has enough units that some banners can be really nice for top decking critical power drops ready in choke turns, like if you have to Harsh Roll and stuff like that, or hit like a Rizahn on 6 and so on, with already something out. So yeah, that explains the deck and the power base. If for whatever reason I would decide and could see cutting a power, which I don't really see, since you also really need the 16 base justice, but you really need the 20 shadow to make your setback reliable enough, because there's no point in putting setback in your deck to beat aggro, to be able to play it on 3 or at the latest on 4 when you set up your power base so that it isn't remotely capable of doing that. And 18 fire is still really not a lot, given that you have Rizahn and Cookbook, and you want your Cookbook at least to be a turn 5 play, and for it to be a reasonably reliable turn 5 play, you need your like 18-ish fire to do that, and you also want to be able to spend your power early on a Cookbook sometimes when you have spare power that you can't use otherwise. So yeah, I think the soft 18 with the privilege on Justice, 18 fire and 20 shadow is a very ideal amount here. And yeah, I really like the other numbers. Could see the force removal, could see being wrong about the Icaria, could also see just going down to 2 sword and no Icaria, but that might be a bit too light on top end, not sure. Could see trying other things than Icaria as a finisher in the market slot, but that's pretty much it. I don't think I like a 3rd privilege over the, say, 4th Justice Sigil, both because it brings you down to 15 Justice, which might sometimes give you situations where you have a privilege but no Justice to cast it, which would be devastating. It would be nice for Quarry to have more privileges to flip, but 3 privileges on 4 Justice Sigils is also a recipe to blow back up in your face in a bunch of critical spots and then losing because of it, and that's not worth it. Also, privilege is a bit clunky, and the deck already has 4 setback and 4 slay and 4 merchant on 3, so you also don't want to be playing too many 3-cost cards there. Okay, that's the deck list. As usual, we're gonna hop into some games in top 100 Masters. And yeah, one last thing before we hop into the games. Make sure to subscribe down here if you want more content in the future, and turn on the notification icon to not miss out on anything if you haven't yet. And if you further want to support EternalTitans.com and my YouTube channel, please consider whitelisting EternalTitans.com and YouTube to help support us with ads. Okay, let's dive into some games. See you in a moment with game number 1.